Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe that the world is all about them. And in today's episode, guys, nothing is worse than people who show their true colors when there's a death involved. We've got people trying to steal from family members, thinking they're owed houses, inheritances, there's bad bosses. Guys, you're in for a treat. I hope you enjoy the stories, don't shake your heads too hard, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So I've had some truly awful work experiences, but this has to be the worst. This happened about 4 years ago. At the time, I was working at a grocery store and I was the fastest cashier, so I'd always be put on the express lane. I would also almost exclusively get closing shifts, ones from 4:15 to 9:15, since I was also in high school at the time. One day, I had a closing shift on a Saturday. That morning, my dad woke me up at 7 a.m. to tell me that my cousin, who had been battling cancer for years, had lost the battle. He then told me to get ready, as we were going to go see the cousin's brother, to try to keep his mind off of things. I proceeded to get ready, and while we're in the truck on the way to cousin's brother's house, I call into work. Now, I was hoping to get literally any other manager besides Karen, but she was the one who picked up. The conversation basically went like this. She said, "Hi, Karen speaking." I say, "Hi, Karen." She asked, "How are you?" And I tell her, "I'm not so good. I got a call this morning saying that my cousin had died last night." Now, she didn't even give me enough time to finish my sentence. She interrupts me and says, "Remember, you're on Express tonight and it's Saturday. We're gonna be really busy." Up until this point, I would have still gone in if manager was unable to find a replacement for me. So I say, "I'm so sorry, but I can't make it in." And Karen says, "What exactly do you expect me to do?" At that, I just apologized again, making it clear that I'm not gonna be at work. I then hang up. About an hour later, I get a call. And it's the nice manager saying, "How are you doing?" I answered, "I'm hanging in there," and he says, "I heard what happened from the other manager. I'm so sorry. The reason I'm calling is because the store owner would like to meet with you during your lunch break on Monday." At this point, I knew exactly what would happen on Monday. I say to him, "Okay, did the store owner tell you anything else?" They say, "No, that she just wants to speak with you." Nice manager gave her condolences once again and ended the call. So Monday rolls around, and during my lunch break, I walked from my high school down to work. As soon as I got there, I saw the manager, and she walked me to the store owner's office. The owner says, "Hi, please have a seat. How are you doing?" I tell the owner I'm doing okay considering the circumstances, thanks. Owner tells me, "I'm sorry you have to go through that. The reason I called you here today is to talk about Saturday." I ask, "Okay, did I do something wrong?" The owner then tells me, "Well, you left us understaffed." She then asked, "What required you to miss the shift?" I then start explaining. I say, "Well, as you know, my cousin died, and we had a family get-together to try to improve the mood." The owner then goes on and says, No, we know there was a death in the family, but what required you to miss the shift? Could you not have visited your family before your shift, or even the next day?" Hearing her say that, I said, "I'm sorry." She repeats herself, and I say, "I heard you. I'm just baffled." And at this point, I was livid. They didn't fire me, but they gave me a warning, basically, saying not to let this happen again. I have no clue how I stayed so calm during this exchange. I continued to work at the place for another year. Even 4 years later, it makes my blood boil thinking about it. Guys, honestly, reading this post makes my blood boil. Like, how some people can continue to be such a-holes during a time like this is beyond me, guys. And I do understand that the business has to keep running, but my goodness, like, do these people actually hear what they're saying? Like, how dare your cousin die and leave us understaffed, right? And if I were in OP's shoes, I would have quit on the spot. Like, there's no way I'm working another year at that crap hole. So if you like a good after round and found out, you'll love this story. A few years ago, my granddad died in a rehab facility as a result of gross negligence. My dad and uncle opened a lawsuit on behalf of granddad's estate. It drags on and it looks like it's going nowhere. 2 years ago, my dad died a couple of months after a cancer diagnosis. It was sudden, and my uncle had promised him that his kids were now his, that he would look out for us. I was the executor of Dad's estate, and I did the usual business of selling property, closing accounts, etc. And since Uncle was the executor of Granddad's estate, I asked him if it was still open and what the lawsuit status was. My uncle said the lawsuit went nowhere and the estate was closed, and this is where I made a mistake. I took his word. Dad's estate was settled and closed last winter. My siblings and I split everything according to the will, and life continued. In April, my uncle called me to tell me he wanted to gift my siblings and me a small amount of money. The lawsuit on behalf of Granddad was paying out, and Uncle wanted to give us $10,000 to split. That's when he told me that Dad's estate needs to be reopened to claim it. There were so many red flags that you'd think the circus was in town. So I played nice. I thanked him, and I immediately called the courthouse where Granddad and Dad's estates were established. The clerk told me that not only was Granddad's estate still open, but there was a large bond on a sum of money recently placed. And did I want the name of the lawyer on file? And I told her, yes, I did. So I called the lawyer, and the receptionist told me they were trying to find my contact information. The lawyer gets on the line, and as one of the beneficiaries, he's able to fill me in on everything. I found out that right after Dad was diagnosed, the lawsuit for Granddad was settled. My dad died without knowing that the rehab center admitted their part in causing his father's death, and they paid out a settlement. The money then sat in limbo for 18 months through the funeral and the sale of the properties. The first business day after Dad's estate closed, Uncle petitioned for the release of funds as the sole beneficiary. The estate lawyer discovered that Uncle wasn't the sole beneficiary and requested my contact information, which Uncle claimed that he did not have. The lawyer tells him that my siblings and I were still his beneficiaries even though Dad's estate was closed. We were entitled to Dad's share. And this is when Uncle called me with this tale of wanting to gift us a small amount. The total sum of the lawsuit after taxes and the lawyer's fees was around $150,000. And since Dad and Uncle were the sole beneficiaries of Granddad's estate, they would each get half. And learning that, guys, I was furious. I called the siblings and we agreed to play it cool. The lawyer for Granddad's estate knew Uncle was being shady and he never intended to split the money, so he refused to release the funds to Granddad's estate. The checks would go to Uncle and Dad's estate directly. I decided to bide my time with Uncle and not reveal the extent of what I knew. 2 more months go by and the estate's reopened and the bank account is established. This is when Uncle finds out, through the lawyer, that the funds would not be given to Uncle to disperse, but would go directly to the beneficiaries. And that's when Uncle calls me spitting mad, saying he did all the legwork of getting the lawsuit done, and he deserved a good chunk of payment. He felt that giving us $10,000 was fair, as we did absolutely nothing. I told him the courts had a system for that sort of thing, and he would get his hours and time through the lawyers. Uncle went a different route. He then went into a rant that Dad owed him money, a lot of money before he died. And if we agreed to only getting $10,000, he would call it even. He said if we didn't take the $10,000, that we would potentially get even less once he's done, whatever that means. I then told him to try. And Uncle did try. Granddad's estate lawyer wouldn't say how many versions of the application he rejected before they arrived at an acceptable rate that the judge would agree to. Uncle wanted us to pay for a grave plot since Dad died first and he took the last plot in the family graveyard. He wanted repayment for all sorts of things that had nothing to do with Granddad's estate. The poor estate lawyer had to try to beat estate laws and inheritance into Uncle's head, but Uncle was determined to take both his share and Dad's. He basically said, I'm the executor, they don't deserve a damn thing. In the end, my siblings and I accepted the first reasonable rate, and we walked away with half the remaining balance. Uncle never realized that the sum would come off the top, not deducted from Dad's share alone. Despite the paper trail of deception he left, he still feels he's the victim and that we stole from him. And what I've learned in all this is that the saddest thing about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies, it comes from friends and loved ones. You know what they say, guys, greed often brings out the worst in people. And Uncle, having promised Dad that he would take care of his kids as if they were his own, and then turning around and trying to screw them out of their share, is such a scummy thing to do. And he probably knew he was in the wrong, because if he sincerely thought he deserved it all, he wouldn't have lied to OP and the estate lawyer to cover what he was doing. And that last sentence that OP wrote is so true, though. There goes that promise made to Dad, right? Okay, so let's start with a little background. A long time ago, my grandpa gave my parents an acreage of land on his property. He also gave a parcel to my entitled Aunt Karen. He was very fair. My parents owned the land and they built a house on it. They also promised my grandpa that they would not sell it as long as he was alive. Well, after living there for 15 years or so, my father got a job he couldn't pass up. The only downside was it was 4 hours from the house in a city, so we lightly pack up and move, leaving the house intact with someone to check in on it, and a lot of furniture and stuff was still there. We were in the city when Grandpa got sick. He wasn't getting better and he needed home health care. I was halfway through law school and I couldn't go back, but my mom and dad went back to take care of him. My dad stayed in Grandpa's house and he did 24-hour care, and my mom starts living in the old family home again. Grandpa's health went downhill over the course of the year, and he eventually passed. I was really close to him, and the funeral was hard on me. Of course, family from all over came and paid their respects. So anyways, after the funeral, we went to our grandfather's house for a gathering, and we ate some of the food that everyone brought. It was a really sad time. There was a lot of people there to offer condolences, to grieve, and to share memories of Grandpa. I only mention that because of what happens next. We were speechless when this happened. So maybe an hour later, we see a vehicle pull up, and out pops entitled Aunt Karen, along with some people whom we've never met. Entitled Aunt was holding her grandbaby. We're all confused, and we asked her what she was doing with this group of people here. She then said that she told these people that we would probably sell Grandpa's house now that he's dead. Her words, and that she was showing it to her friends just in case they were interested. So entitled Aunt Karen walks in the house, hands her grandson to me, and she says, "You like kids, right OP? Watch him for me." She then starts taking everyone on a tour of the house. Now keep in mind, there's people in the house grieving the loss of a father, grandfather, great-grandfather, friend, etc. There were people crying, and I was trying to hold back tears. Meanwhile, Karen's taking people around the house, telling them to look out the window at the stunning views, and how pretty it was, how they would love living here. Now I only wish there was a feel-good ending. My parents, overwhelmed with everything in the last few weeks, just tried to wrangle her away from rooms that we were actively using, and then kick them out of the house. Guys, the post ends right there, but that is not only entitled what that Karen was doing, but also disgusting. Like why? Why would you bring strangers to view a home, knowing full well that in the home, there was a gathering where people were mourning the loss of a loved one? Like how inconsiderate can somebody be? Oh, my dad just died, so he doesn't need this house anymore, so it's gonna be on the market. Who wants to buy it? Shame on you, Aunt Karen. And if you guys think that was wild, listen to this next one. So this happened 3 years ago. My aunt, married to my uncle, has always been quite entitled. It's always been very clear to my entire family from the start that she mainly married my uncle for money, and expected to always be treated like a princess by him. And she always had a horrible attitude when things didn't go exactly as she wanted. My mother had just passed away, and we were doing final preparations for her funeral that would take place the next day. I also want to note that I was 19 during this time, and with everything that happened, I of course was already not in the best state of mind. I was very much grieving the loss of my mother, who I was extremely close to, and I just wanted everything to go as smoothly as possible, without the hassle of disturbances that could potentially make me even more stressed out and depressed. Thus, I decided that I did not want to have young children at the funeral, at least not during the reception and the speeches. Young children make lots of noise, especially when it's quiet. I didn't want anything to disturb the reception and the people who wanted to give a speech about my mom, and thus I did not want young children to attend. Everyone with young children were very understanding, and they didn't make a fuss about it. Everyone except for my aunt. I first told my uncle that I wanted no young children to attend the funeral a few days before, and thus asked him if he could make sure he got a babysitter for their 1-year-old son. He appeared to not have any problem with it, and he said he'd tell my aunt about it. Later that night, I get a text from him, asking why I don't want young children to attend. I explained the above-mentioned reasons to him, and then he asked if I could make an exception for his son. I found this to be very odd and very annoying, and said I would not be making exceptions for anyone. The following day in the evening, I receive another text message from him, and this time it had very emotionally manipulative undertones to it. The guy said something along the lines of, "Please don't make this time harder on us than it already is." You need to allow us to take our son with us, and you're letting your emotions over your mom's loss cloud your judgment, which absolutely infuriated me. So come the day before the funeral, my aunt and uncle had still refused to get a babysitter for their son, and we were discussing in the reception hall of the funeral home. This time, my aunt was present, and she told me their son was going to attend. I once again said no, and I asked them to drop it because I wasn't going to change my mind. My nephew's girlfriend even offered to babysit their son for the duration of the reception. It was literally only going to be like 2 hours. My aunt flat out refused her offer and once again said her son will attend. Once again, I told her no young children allowed, and my decision was final. She then throws a temper tantrum bigger than her 1-year-old infant would ever be able to throw. She starts crying, screaming, saying I was being unfairly cruel to her, and outright started to demand her son attend my mom's funeral, or else she wouldn't. She then storms outside and she starts crying, yelling at my family members how I wasn't raised right. We had literally lost my mom not even a week ago. My uncle did not say anything. He just followed her outside and eventually left with her. We were absolutely livid, and I was on the verge of breaking down into tears at that point. So the day of the funeral arrives, and my aunt and her son are absent, and my uncle arrives alone. I was of course preoccupied by my grief and the funeral itself. And at first, I didn't pay much attention to my uncle. But after my nephew had given his speech about my mother, he whispered to me that our uncle was holding his phone up high, appearing to be recording everything. And what I found out was way worse. He wasn't recording. He had my aunt on FaceTime and he was video chatting her. I asked him if he could stop doing that since it was making people uncomfortable. He then said that he was live streaming for my aunt and that if we had only allowed his son to attend, he wouldn't have to do this. And yes, he literally said that. Meanwhile, my aunt starts screaming at me through the phone. At this point, I was too emotionally exhausted to cause a scene, but I was absolutely livid. Thankfully, the rest of the funeral went smoothly, and my uncle immediately leaves after the reception and speeches. He didn't even bother to talk to the rest of the family members and attendees afterwards. Needless to say, I pretty much cut them out of my life after that, and to this day, they've never apologized to me for their behavior. And that's because in their eyes, you were in the wrong OP, not them, for wanting an uncontrollable 1-year-old to be brought to a funeral. Like, that is mega disrespectful though, right? Like holding that phone to live stream to his wife, like they're at some sort of a concert or something. And this person says what a lot of us are probably thinking. This person comments, I would have smacked that phone out of his hand. Like, what the actual F? This story is dedicated to the memory of my mom, and to my dad and brother, who together showed me the true meaning of strength, character, and loyalty. My brother and I live with my mom on the top floor of the apartment. My grandmother lives on the bottom. My mom is also diagnosed with aggressive brain cancer, and that's when my grandmother becomes the devil incarnate. She knew that she has life estate in the property if my mom passes. That means she can live there until she dies, but she can't sell that right in the property to anyone. We're not rich by any means, but my mom leaves her $100,000 too, for the upkeep. It's not enough. The life estate is worthless to her. She doesn't want to live there. She wants the money from selling the house. For the time that my mother was dying, my grandmother made her passing an absolute misery. 5 weeks before my mother passed, we tried to stage an effing family intervention for my effing grandmother to ask her to please stop berating my mom over monetary matters. My mom invited a bloody social worker. The poor guy tried 7 times to get her off the topic of money, to think about family and coming together. But Grandma consistently turned the topic to how she was always my mother's milking cow. And the way she said it, good God. The sing-song, passive-aggressive, victimized voice she adopted, the drawn-out sighs, made the people who heard it physically ill. My blood pressure rises as I write. The social worker told me privately that it was hopeless and that he was truly sorry, and you could tell he meant it sincerely. She then starts to send out emails to all of our mutual friends and family saying that my brother and I were spoiled, abusive, don't deserve an inheritance, and then attached 200 receipts for household items that she had gifted to my mother that she wanted back now. Some people believed her, and others were so weirded out by being dragged into such a private dispute that they vowed to remain neutral, to keep their distance and slowly cut off contact. We lost a lot of our social network. My mother was impressionable, and she was childlike due to the brain cancer. 4 weeks before she passed, my brother calls to tell me that Grandma's trying to sneak a lawyer into our apartment. She wanted my mom to change her will to exclude us. So after racing home, we had a shouting match in our apartment, and I told her to go back to hers. And the lawyer at least had the good sense to F off. Then, she falsely accuses my brother and me of elder abuse. She said we barged into her apartment, pushed her around, and threatened her, which didn't happen, not even a little bit. 3 weeks away, we get interviewed by police. Oh, joy. The day we moved my mother into hospice was the day my dear granny decided to change the locks to our apartment. It took us 6 months in court to get our possessions back. Luckily, we had someplace else to live. We found out later that before any of this, she had secretly sold off an apartment of my mom's in the old country and illegally pocketed $16,000. So here's how we got back at her. We waited until she sued the estate. We got back by finally telling her that the executive of the estate, me, but not me, was the only person who could buy out her life estate in the property, and was bound to negotiate in good faith. She didn't know that. It was telling her that her life estate was valued at over $300,000, and that was everything she ever wanted. She didn't know that either. It was also informing her that all she ever needed to do was ask for cash in lieu of the life estate, that I could not refuse such a request as an executor. She had no clue. And finally, it was telling her that thanks to her actions, she would never see a red cent of it. She tied up the estate with her own vexatious lawsuits and unlawful garnishment. To put it mildly, it would be most improper to settle any estate with such outstanding disputes. My brother and I are young. We can wait. She's old. She can go to hell. So I explained to her that every year that goes by, the value of her life estate loses about $12,000, and she didn't seem to like that at all. And I tell you, there's nothing more satisfying and rare than seeing a sociopath realize how much hubris and deceit has hurt their own self-interest. For all the feigned emotions, the desperation she showed is truly authentic, and need I say gratifying. Of course, she squeals, but it's not too late. The appropriate response then is to openly laugh in her face. So I did. I couldn't stop. And unlike hers, my tears were authentic. Last I hear, she's suing her previous lawyer for misleading her. He dropped her case when we pointed out that she had forged her banking statement in her submitted evidence. She did it to hide that my mother had years earlier lawfully bought her share in the ownership of the house. Another law firm has picked her up, but her lawyers delayed any action for many months now. Irritatingly, it still lingers over our heads, but we plan to motion for dismissal at cost. We think she moved back to the old country because it's cheaper to live there, leaving behind $400,000 and any hope of a settlement. When I hear of her death, I'll make sure the funeral is open casket. The casket will be made of compressed particle board. We will put her in a hole. I'll then tell the gravekeeper that we'll save him his work and establish an outhouse over the site. That's what the entitled witch deserves. Guys, it is hard to imagine how a grandmother could be like that with her own family. And I just hope she realizes the unnecessary trouble she went through. All for nothing because she got greedy. But that, my friends, is r/EntitledPeople. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy, crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's an r/I-don't-work-here-lady episode, where a Karen is convinced that OP is a police officer and demands he make arrest. It's such a funny story, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.